Welcome to our Lunch and Learn today. I think it's series 14. So wow. We've had lots and lots this year. I'm very excited for this one today. Today we're looking at communicating across cultures and building high performance teams. So our host is Access Offshoring and presented by Tiffany English. So Tiffany is the founder and CEO of Access Offshoring. It's a company that helps businesses scale efficiently through tailored offshoring solutions. So if you want to optimize your operations and drive growth, then listen in today. I think over to Tiffany. If you've got questions along the way, please type them up in the chat and we'll get to them at the end. There'll be at least 15 minutes at the end for Q&A. So over to you, Tiffany.
Thank you, Helen, Lisa, Baxter, and everyone else from the FCA team who's helping out to get this happening. I can see a few more people still rolling in. And today, look, I want to make this super educational. And if you guys saw me recently speaking at the Franchise Industry Forum, I spent a lot of my time talking about how we better improve the relationships between Aussie teams and the Filipino teams. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. So I want you to go away with some actionable steps. I had 12 minutes last time. I have a little longer this time. So I'm excited to be able to actually provide some context and information and some tools that you guys can all take away. So normally in my own webinar processes, I get the opportunity to do some panels. So I can't see many of you, but it's always really interesting to me to know who's offshoring and who isn't. So if you are online, it would be great if you could start writing in the chat. If you're offshoring, write yes. If you're not, write no. Just gives me a really good indication of how to layer this presentation so that you're all getting the most value. I can see people still coming in. So just a yes or a no in the chat for those of you like, nice, Brent, not yet, love it. Good to see you here, mate. Anyone else? Great answer. A couple of no's. Keep those coming in. Okay, interesting. And so what's also really interesting about offshoring, and one of the biggest comments that I got post the Franchise Industry Forum was, if I'd known what you just spoke about, then my whole offshore experience might have been a little different. So that's what I want to take you through. I'm going to explain some of the differences between cultures. And it is important for me as well to say that this applies irrespective of location and across all countries. I'm focusing obviously on the Philippines today because that's where we recruit. But if you have other teams, then feel free to throw that in and I can provide you some more context around that too. For those of you who don't know me yet, I'm Tiffany English. I've spent most of my career in business turnarounds, business improvement, and change management. And so looking very specifically at how do I scale people and how do I scale systems? And so offshoring for me has always been a strategy. And it's probably coming up about 17 years since I hired my first offshore team member. And it was completely focused around how do I make the directors in this company, the managers in this company, the leaders in this organization completely elevate their positions and focus on the things that matter. And so that's what I've spent my time doing. And since then, we've now built an offshore recruitment company, which focuses on placing Philippines-based staff with businesses in Australia predominantly, and also the US. But we do something really different. And what we do differently is talk to businesses about how to find the right team members. So when we're looking at specifically franchises and franchise systems, it's really easy for you guys to have systems in place, SOPs in place, checklists. They are all things that come very naturally to a franchise system because of the way you're set up. Often, however, at head office level, those checklists or those SOPs don't necessarily go down to what exactly is happening at the franchisor head office perspective, so that when we start bringing in offshore team members to support some of those back office roles, it's not as effective. It also isn't always in play when we're talking about franchisees and exactly those minute strategies, for example, executive assistant roles that learn how do you want things done. And so that's one of the things that potentially is missing. Secondary is offshore teams can be treated as plug and play. And this absolutely won't work when you're going down an offshore strategy that is hiring someone specifically for you, your business, your culture, and embedding them in the team. And so it's really important for us to find businesses and systems that are ready to basically start building the whole system to allow for their team members to be completely onboarded. And then next is cultural alignment gets sidelined. You know, when we talk about the Philippines market and just the Philippines alone as an offshore talent hub, there are about 119 million people that we can pull from. Now, not all of those would be applicable for positions in a remote offshore perspective for various reasons. But even if we focus on the top 5% of that talent, we still have an enormous population, more than that of Queensland's whole population. So we're talking about an enormous amount of people. It's not hard to find Filipinos to join your team, but where people go wrong is that they see significant cost savings, they see an enormous talent pool, and they let everything else get sidelined, particularly cultural alignment. So that comes down to what is the culture within the organization, who's the sort of person we're looking for, but also communication styles, expectations. Have we considered the difference in cultures across countries? It's not just the internal culture of mission and values. So what I spoke very briefly on for those who saw me speak at the Franchise Industry Forum was what we refer to as the culture gap. And I look at these 7 pieces of the puzzle. And today I just want to spend a bit more time on each of them to explain where this goes wrong. And again, as I alluded to at the start of this presentation, this applies irrespective of whether they're in the Philippines or sitting next to you. Yes, we're focusing on the Philippines, but every culture could be placed on this scale. And so it all comes down to background, experience, where they've spent most of their time. And until you understand that about a person, communication gets sidelined. There is definitely misalignment, and there is absolutely a difference in expectations. So let's start with focus on communicating. I'm just going to do, everyone can hear me okay? We're going good. Slides are great. Great. I've got the tick of approval from the FCA. So when we talk about communicating, this is one of the biggest gaps when we look at exactly what's happens between Filipinos and Australians. And if you just look at the dots with blue being Philippines and green being Australia, you can see there is a significant gap. And what we talk about in communicating is context. So that is how much information do we provide surrounding a task, a direction, or instruction. Now, us Aussies stereotypically tend to be very low context. It wouldn't be the first time that someone has sent a 1-line instruction and expected someone to fill in all the gaps. Now, that might be okay if you're in an office environment where people are sitting behind you and they've been able to achieve some understanding or some context awareness naturally. That is very difficult for a remote worker. Where this makes it even harder is a remote worker in the Philippines that wants high context. Now, when I say Filipinos want high context, I mean everything that is surrounding that task. And one of the biggest comments I get about people in offshore teams is I sent them something to do, they did exactly what I asked, but it was nothing like what I expected. And that often gives people the perception that they just follow the bouncy ball and do exactly as asked and can't think outside of that box. And I'll talk more about that in a couple of moments about why that might be the case and why there's some conditioning there. But it also comes down to context. And so the less information they have, the less information they have to go off, and the less they understand exactly the outcome it is that you're trying to achieve. And so, with all of those things considered, what often happens is what you've asked for is nothing like what you're going to get. So, what can you do to overcome this? You absolutely need to, on all instances, avoid close-ended questions. Always open-ended questions, and I encourage you to do this with new team members as well, irrespective of their background. So instead of, do you think this is, do you understand what I just told you? You're not going to get the answer that you need there. You're absolutely going to get the answer that that person thinks you want to hear. And one of the elements of this, when you consider Filipinos, is that they're a culture of respect, they're a culture of saving face, and they're absolutely a culture of non-confrontation. And so for them to come back to you, if you've said, do you understand what what I've just said? For them to say no, it would be completely uncomfortable for them. And so instead, the way to combat this is to ask open-ended questions where you're implying that there's going to be more to this and you're very happy for them to speak up. And so things like, what are your thoughts on? Can you walk me through what it was, your understanding of what it was I just provided to you? Hey, I don't know if I gave you enough context there. Would it be helpful if I gave you more context on, and which areas would you like those extra context on? Right. So if you're asking questions that are leading or open ended, you're going to get a far better outcome. You want to avoid one-line instructions as much as possible, but you'll see at the bottom of that screen as well, you also want to avoid sending lengthy emails. Both of those are really hard to interpret, particularly in a low context environment. So what you want to do wherever possible is use video, like what we're doing today, or voice. And so whether you're screen recording, whether you're doing voice memos, or whether you're getting on a Teams call and recording it so they can watch it back later, all really effective ways to provide more context. And the reality is when you're verbally speaking, you will provide more information than if you're typing things out. So you need to keep that in mind. Definitely don't expect instant understanding. And I think one of the areas that most people go wrong on is that they expect that instant understanding because you forget how much you know about your role and your organization, which has come naturally over a long period of time. For someone who's completely new to your organization, they know nothing. And so, one thing that you can do, particularly when you're onboarding new team members, is have a video call just going consistently for a few days. You can mute it if you're talking about something confidential, but what it does do is it allows you to pick up a phone call and for them to overhear it. It allows them to hear conversations happening in the office, elements that they wouldn't be exposed to unless you were able to achieve that. So that's a really great way to onboard anyone, even in a remote context. And then importantly for Filipinos, you need to build a relationship where it's okay for them to say, I have no idea what you just said. And I encourage that a lot with my Filipino teams where they'll just look at me and they'll say, Tiff, no idea what's happening. Or you definitely need to provide more context. And it's become a bit of an in-house joke now where I say, every culture likes context, team. Can I have more context? Because the less you know, the harder it is to action. So keep that in mind from a communication front. The next element that comes into play, particularly with Filipinos, is evaluating and disagreeing. So when you're looking at Filipinos, they are very indirect in the way that they provide negative feedback. They will walk around a table 100 times before they have to directly tell you that something's not right. Now, compare that to an Aussie culture. Whilst we're not completely direct with some of that negative feedback, as other cultures could be, we do tend to be pretty blunt and pretty direct. And we're happy to provide that level of feedback, constructive criticism, as we'd often call it. But when you couple that with disagreeing and the fact that Filipinos hate confrontation and that Aussies don't mind confrontation, or at least are open to it, you get a real disjointment and a real dissatisfaction in the workplace. And so while it's unnecessary to, step on eggshells around your team members, I absolutely don't want you to do that. But I want you to be mindful of the way in which you're delivering any sort of feedback and how that might be perceived by that person, particularly if they've come from a culture where that is absolutely not going to happen. And so some of the areas that you can do here to combat this is provide really balanced feedback. I talk about a sandwich approach. How can we say something good, coupled with the constructive criticism, ended with something also good? And so you can take a conversation from, hey, you sent me this email and you missed 3 points. We need to get on a call and work out how to fix this. Very confrontational, pretty direct, to, hey, thanks so much for sending that email. I'm really impressed with your turnaround time. There's a couple of areas of that email that we just didn't quite get to. Let's jump on a video call and go through it together. But I'm so impressed at how well you're picking these things up. You're doing a great job. So the difference in conversation there is all of a sudden going to put your team members at ease and remind them that you're on their team. And it comes back to criticizing as well. Don't do that in public, particularly with a culture that saves face. So very prominent across India cultures, Filipino cultures, Asian cultures. Praise in public, criticize privately. Focus on the behavior, not the person. Again, it's really easy in the heat of the moment to be like, you didn't do something. I can't believe you forgot. Versus, hey, you're doing a great job, but we've just forgot these few pieces. So let's work on bridging that gap. When we talk about Filipinos, it's very common for them to not want to speak up. And if you've worked with Filipino teams before, this is going to happen commonly, and it takes some time for this to be overcome. But one of the ways you want to do this is never interrupt or dismiss their idea. So they are going to start getting to a point where they want to speak up and they're comfortable to speak up. But if you interrupt their ideas or dismiss their ideas, then they're automatically going to go back into this shell where they're not comfortable. Be mindful of tone and body language. and using slang or idioms that may be misinterpreted. In Australia, we use a lot of them, and it's really easy and comfortable for us to go backwards and forwards. We have this funny thing every time I go to the Philippines where they sit me down with a video camera and they've come up with all these Aussie slang and they say, "All right, Tiff, what does this mean?" And I'm like, let's not discuss that one on air. And so you really forget how much slang we have. But you also don't necessarily put into that the fact that they're going to take it in a completely different way. You know, if I say to one of my team members, "Don't stress," that to me means, "Hey, move on, let's keep going." But to them, actually, it means completely the opposite, and they'll lose sleep over it. So just be mindful of how those things are interpreted. What does it look like in terms of leading and deciding? And this is absolutely one of the critical reasons why you have team members in the Philippines or other countries where they have not spoken up, where they're following the bouncing ball of information, and where you haven't been able to get them to show initiative. This is why. So in the Philippines, very hierarchical, very structured, a lot of different layers are in place. Australia, on the other hand, is very flat. We have very little structure when it comes to organizations. And so then you couple that with decision making, and the Philippines being very top down decision making. If you look even at their political system, very dictatorship. In Australia, however, we're very collaborative. And so, what does this look like in play? If you look at a Philippines organization where the senior leaders of the organization make all the decisions, there is absolutely no way a CEO would be seen with any of the admin staff within an organization, and they're instructed to follow the process verbatim. And if they were to go outside of that process, if they were to suggest that there's an issue or an improvement, they would often be terminated or at least suspended from their role, right? And so this is such a big difference to what happens in Australia, where we're bringing them into an environment where it's completely flat. And it's not uncommon for CEOs to have regular communication and even coffee catch ups with what they might consider bottom of the org chart. But we're also really collaborative. And guess what? Aussies demand initiative. And so what happens here is that you're bringing them from a culture where they've been absolutely conditioned against initiative, absolutely conditioned against thinking for themselves, and you're plonking them into an Australian business who absolutely wants the opposite. So this is a huge difference in the way that businesses lead across the Philippines and Australia, and accounts for probably 90% of the dissatisfaction in offshore remote teams. And so when you think about this, it is not a personality trait. It doesn't mean they're incapable of thinking for themselves. It just means that that's a conditioning, and it's going to take some time and energy from you to be able to shift that. But you can, and trust me, it works. I've got team members now who never used to speak up to me, and now every now and then I have to remind them that I'm the boss. And so there's a really big shift from another perspective that you can absolutely come to, but it takes time and energy. So what not to do? Dominate conversations. I think about this in just our team meetings internally, and Aussies communicate quickly. We jump in to communicate even quicker. We come to conclusions often even faster, and we've moved on before those people in the other people in your organization have even had a chance to say hello. Right. And so there's elements where you have to try to leave breaks, because I'll tell you, a Filipino won't interrupt a conversation unless there is a period of probably a 4 to 7 second gap. That's an awful long time for an Aussie. We don't usually leave that much space open unless someone doesn't like talking. And so there's ways that you just have to consider this. And if you know it's going to be difficult for you and the Aussie team to leave gaps for the Philippines team to speak up, then put processes in place. You know, one of the systems that we've implemented internally is that we raise a topic, and on a Teams call, everyone should put up their virtual hand if they've got something to say about this. And that means we go around the table and we make sure we've heard from everyone before we just jump to a conclusion and move on. And so that's a really great way to encourage that two-way dialogue, as well as things like at the end of every meeting, we want a comment and a question from everyone. Again, a way to make them come out of their shell and start speaking up. You don't want to rush through onboarding. We spoke about this a little bit a couple of minutes ago, where I suggested putting a screen up where you've got them on a video call consistently for a few minutes, for a few days. But the more context you can provide, the better it's going to be. The more relationship you can build, the more effective it's going to be. So put time into onboarding. Have very clear feedback loops. So when you think about them coming from a culture where they're not able to speak up and they absolutely don't want to disrespect their leaders, if you simply have a recurring calendar invite, whether it be daily, weekly, or fortnightly, where your team members know they have that time to come to you to go through what priorities are, what exactly they need help with, what roadblocks they have, where you can see where they're up to with tasks. What you're doing is completely you're completely bringing down what might be seen as a confrontational conversation versus them having a task that they're working on. They're having to reach out to you and interrupt your day. They're having to ask for help, which is, again, something that is quite confronting for them. You want to create a safe space for discussion, and some of the tools I've given you already is a great way to do that. And finally, to this point, you want to be mindful of who is directing tasks. When I spoke about the hierarchy in place, right, what happens is if someone is at the top of the food chain, and they directing a task over the top of a manager directly down to administration staff, in a Filipino culture, they will absolutely ignore that middle manager and just continue working with the top leader. And it's what happens very commonly. And so you do really have to watch who you're directing tasks to make sure you're getting the best out of everybody. Trusting. This is absolutely fascinating to me and something that causes a significant amount of friction below the surface, and you don't even know it's happening. It can absolutely hinder a relationship in the first couple of days of employment, and it will definitely not help moving forward. So, what exactly does this mean? So, trust from a Aussie perspective looks at tasks. So typically how an Aussie will build trust is you've started with the organization. I'm going to give you a task. I'm going to see how quick you can do it, how well you bring that task back to me, exactly what the outcome is. Once I know you can do it competently in line with what your suggested skills are, I'm going to start to trust you. And only once I start to trust you will I start to build a relationship with you. Now, that's all well and good, unless you're working with Filipino teams who are the absolute direct opposite. And what I mean by that is Filipinos want to build a relationships first before they start to trust. And only when they trust will they actually probably give you 100% when it comes to task completion. And so you have this complete disconnect right out of the gate where Filipinos just want to know your dog's name, your parents' names, how many kids you've got, and want to build somewhat of a relationship with you. Compare that to task-based Aussies who just want you to do a task. And so we're jumping to conversations very quickly. We are starting a Teams call like today, and we're not asking how you are, not because we don't care, but because we're more focused on tasks. And you've got to remember, in this perspective, it's really hard to do those water cooler conversations. That doesn't happen in a remote environment. It can't happen. And so keep that in mind. The better you can build a relationship and the quicker you can start to do that, the better the outcome of all the tasks that you're providing. So what not to do? Try not to rush into task delegation, but instead invest time in building rapport. Easier said than done. I'm not asking you to spend 3 hours a week doing this. I'm merely saying put 30 seconds at the front end of your team's calls to say, hey, how was your weekend? What have you got planned for next weekend? Oh, you mentioned last week your mother wasn't well. Is everything going okay? Just by doing those few things and taking a couple of extra seconds at the start of the call, you're completely changing the relationship perspective from the Filipino side. Try not to focus solely on work related interactions. Now, I know personally I'm terrible at this. And so all of the things that I'm not great at, my weaknesses, I put systems in place to try and overcome. So most fortnights we have a team bingo session where I know we can have just a offline, no work chat, but focus on something fun where we're building rapport as part of the team. You want to be reliable and consistent. I know we're providing employment opportunities and I know there's a lot of work happening, but when you schedule meetings and you don't show up, or you tell them you're going to do something and you don't, it really starts to crush down that relationship that you've been working to build. So, less of that, the more you'll build a relationship, the better the trust. And again, the better the outcome of your tasks. Don't assume that task completion alone will build strong trust, and I've spoken a lot to that. And also show appreciation for their contribution, because, like all people, we like to feel appreciated. Something that I do in this area is I actually do a workplace appreciation quiz with every single one of my team members. And if anyone wants a copy of that, please reach out. I'm more than happy to share it. It's 20 quick questions. It's really similar to the love languages for those familiar. But what it does is it enables me to know how my team want to be appreciated. Is it words of affirmation? Is it quality time? Do they want a movie voucher when they've done something really great? And so the more I know about their appreciation language, the more effectively I can appreciate them. And so that's a little tip from me. If you can find what their language is in this respect, then the way you're appreciating them will go a lot further. And then the final one before we go into Q&A is scheduling. And so scheduling refers to how flexible are we predominantly with deadlines. And if we're not flexible, then we're far more linear, meaning there's a strong importance put on deadlines. And so from an Australian perspective, yeah, sure, we're not on the very far left of this scale, but we're a lot closer. And so that means that we often have deadlines. We put emphasis on those deadlines and put strong importance against those deadlines. And a lot of our deadlines are client imposed. Yeah. So particularly in some of these franchise systems, or they're franchise imposed. But when you couple that with a Filipino who has never worked for an Australian business before, you have some disconnects. In the Philippines, they have this thing called Filipino time, which isn't quite as bad as island time, but it's pretty close. And so they are far more flexible. And if you think about them as a culture being more focused on relationships, they will absolutely put preference against building a relationship than getting something done on time. And again, you may notice this with some of the people in your organization with you in your state in Australia, just because of the difference of backgrounds we come from. So you need to absolutely, with Filipino teams, provide really clear deadlines and expectations. And the more effectively you do this, the more emphasis you put on it, the easier it's going to become, and the more they'll appreciate and understand those deadlines. But you do need to be prepared for some level of flexibility. So I always recommend, particularly if you've hired a Filipino who has never worked for an Aussie before, that you need to be prepared for some flexibility and bring those deadlines forward, right? If you've got something due on Friday, tell your team that it's due on Tuesday so that you've got flexibility until you know for sure that they're going to start meeting those deadlines effectively. And you want to communicate effectively if there are any changes, because again, we're building trust, we're building a rapport. The more you communicate, the better the outcomes. And so when you put all of these in place, you want to avoid micromanaging. Again, easier said than done. Ways that we do this is end of day reports are a really effective way to do this. So what was it that you've got done today? What is it that you're still working on in progress? And what is your leader holding you up? What roadblocks do you currently have? Or what are you waiting on? And so very quickly at end of day, you can see really quickly what they're up to, how quickly they've been able to get through their tasks, what their priorities are for the following day. Assume a missed deadline indicates a lack of commitment. Again, hopefully now that I've shown you some of those differences between cultures, you'll recognize that it's more of a cultural nuance than it is a lack of commitment, but it can certainly be taken the wrong way. And then Filipinos do prefer breaks. So there are elements, particularly in a remote workforce, where in high volume environments, it can be becoming overwhelming. And so, particularly in the onboarding phases, the best suggestion I have is to provide a couple of tasks initially where they can build up to. And once they've built up and got really competent in those tasks, then start adding more. And the better you do that, the more they'll align to not only expectations, but deadlines as well. We also have a bucket load of information available that I've been building over several years, decades now, which includes tools, templates, end of day reports, check-in templates, feedback loops, all things that I've spoken about. I'm going to share this with the FCA team to send out as well. I give this away completely for free because I truly believe that if we can just do better at managing our offshore teams, then everyone's going to be happier. And some of the stigma that surrounds it will be completely abolished. So we'll share that with you guys after as well. I think the most important thing from this perspective is the franchise EQ model. And I just bring this down to what awareness can we have? How can we spot cultural blind spots early? How can we adapt? And it's not necessarily changing the way you lead. It's not changing the way you manage, but it's just maybe tweaking the way you say it or ensuring you add a little more context. And once you go beyond just task completion, when you truly start to understand how your teams function, things become pretty powerful. And so when you think about that, more than half of Aussie businesses now working with offshore teams, if you can build the right support around you, with you absolutely are increasing your talent pool enormously, but also supporting all of your franchise head office staff and franchisees. So for those of you who don't know about Access Offshoring, and I want to get to some Q&A, but there's a lot of things that go on behind the scenes. But most importantly, we have a Philippines entity where we're compliantly employing Philippines-based staff to work directly with you under your branding, under your business, and with your team. So we don't handle day-to-day operations. We're facilitating employment for you, but there's a lot more that goes behind the scenes. So we take over 99% of the recruitment, with you doing final quality controls and skills testing, and then obviously all of this cultural education and team development that goes with it. And we do about 4 trips to the Philippines every year. So we highly encourage clients with teams to come over, embed yourself in their culture, and start to really experience what the Philippines is all about. I'm also available on LinkedIn. I put a lot of content up there as often as I can to help bridge some of these gaps as well, short, sharp videos. But I'd love to go to Q&A. I got told by Helen I had to be 15 minutes to go, so we're on time. So hopefully that was helpful.
You've done
awesome.
Done well.
Done very, very well, Tiff. Very good. It was only just 2 weeks ago at the Franchise Expo, one of our members was on their phone saying congratulations. And so when I walked past, he said, "Oh, do you want to say hello to our Philippine team?" So they have the whole admin team in the Philippines, and one of them had proposed. So they were celebrating, and so it was so nice. And he said, "Say hello to them," and it's like so we're, it was waving to them and saying congratulations, and it just showed me the relationships that are built when you've got a team offshore. Absolutely,
Yeah, absolutely.
So, what questions do we all have?
Ask anything. Nothing is taboo. I think there's a lot of concern around some questions that people would typically ask, but the reality is, if you want to do it right, sometimes those hard questions need to be asked. So you can absolutely throw anything in the chat.
Yep. If you don't want to type, just take yourself off mute.
Yeah, even better. I can't see many faces today. Everyone's got their cameras off.
No, everyone's Doug's on, Brent's on.
It gives a thanks for the wave, boys.
I just been sent a question. So, in your experience, what's the most effective way to build trust quickly in a new offshore team when you can't meet face to face?
You know, it doesn't take a lot. Like, people assume that it takes a significant amount of work. It doesn't. It might be you learning how to say good morning in Filipino, right? Or thank you is a really easy one to learn that. It might be you just at the start of your meetings, you saying, "Hey, can we tell me what happened on the weekend?" Definitely just ask about pets' names. Very, very popular in the Philippines.
Really?
But you don't have to, some of my team have like 10 dogs, which blow my mind. But you don't have to overthink it. You just have to ask some of these questions. And so it might be, "Hey, let's start on every other Friday, we do a quick 30-minute bingo game." It's just little things. They don't want a lot. They just want some rapport.
We do have a question here from Caitlin. What would you consider the smallest size team you would look to recruit, if there is one?
Yeah, look, so our biggest preface is that we do full-time only. So we don't do any part-time roles or what's called an outsource model, which is more project-based work, which I can talk to if people have questions on that. So full-time, 40 hours a week. So as long as the workload's there. And if you think about it, one of the great things about Filipinos is that they will happily go across multiple roles, assuming the skill sets align. So if you need someone to support you with bookkeeping internally, but it may not be quite a 100% position in terms of 40 hours, they're happy to dig down and help you from an EA perspective or an administration perspective as well. They are really such a beautiful culture that just want to support you. So that's a really good way to, marketing and admin is another really great interception. Franchising, recruitment, and sales admin are really great ways to put things together. And then we have teams that are 60, 70 people. So it goes from one end to the other. But yeah, one full-timer is generally the smallest. And then you also have to be mindful of retention. And there is a lot of stats. You increase your retention by about 400% if you employ two at a time, just on the outstretch. So rather than one, unless you have really good systems in place to communicate with them effectively.
Yeah. Tiff,
Um,
Caitlin's just added to that.
Mm.
And depending on team size, at what point would you look to provide office space or the likes, or would they prefer work from home abilities?
Yeah, so in the Philippines, work from home is a big thing purely because of traffic. So just to give you some understanding and some extra context, they have a rule in the Philippines around travel. And if your number plate ends in a certain number, you can't drive on certain days. That's how much bad the traffic congestion is.
Grace.
And so what might take, what might take 20 minutes to drive into Australia for the same distance could take them 2 to 3 hours in the Philippines. And often that's not driving, it's in non-air conditioned jeepneys, like little buses, 2 or 3 trains. Like, it's not a good commute. So definitely work from home. However, getting teams together, a really, really effective way to keep building rapport. Now, whether that's when you go over there, so when our clients travel over there, we absolutely arrange office space for them. We have co-working spaces available in all parts of the Philippines. And so it's a great way to get everyone together. And when you start building a team of 3, 4, 5, maybe 10, you might have a monthly or a quarterly get together with them alone, and maybe not the Aussie team, and you just get them together to work together for a couple of days, and you might put them up in some hotels locally. So yeah.
Great. Thanks, Tiff. Doug's got a question. How do you deal with public holidays, annual leave, sick leave, etc.?
Yeah, good question. So in the Philippines are public holidays. If anyone's ever dealt with a Filipino, it's not uncommon for the president to get up on a Monday morning and say it's public holiday today, and everyone in Australia is like, oh my gosh, what is happening? And they have about 20 days public holidays, but only about 10 of them, about same of Australia, is paid, and the others are not. So what we actually do with all of our teams over in the Philippines is we align them with the public holidays of our clients. So if you're in Melbourne or Sydney or wherever you might be, your Filipinos will actually work in alignment with those public holidays. They get 20 days annual leave and 5 days sick leave. So pretty close to Australia, and that's definitely over and above what would be required under Philippines labour law. But we find it certainly helps with the retention. So yeah, but absolutely try and get them aligned with Australian public holidays, because it becomes an absolute scheduling nightmare for you otherwise.
Excellent. Thank you. Any other questions?
I might throw to you, Tiff, one. When we looked at this earlier, one of the things that you offered too was the setup, the work from home setup. That might be good for Caitlin's question as well. What you guys cover as part of the contract?
Yeah, so we're obviously, basically our model is extremely transparent. I worked with a lot of agencies before I started my own, and was just really disappointed at the lack of transparency. And when you're trying to promote your staff, when you're trying to give pay increases or bonus structures and you've got no visibility on what their even salary is, it's impossible. And so the model we have is essentially salaries and government mandated benefits at cost, and we charge a monthly management fee. But the management fee, to your point, Lisa, includes all at home setup. So we provide a laptop, 2 monitors, headset, webcam, the whole shebang for them to work comfortably from home. We also have great health cover in place for private health, kind of equivalent to Bupa. And we do a lot of town halls and cultural education pieces. What I presented to you today, we present on the other side of the fence and tell Filipinos how Aussies typically respond and what they might expect working with an Aussie. So it's up to us to kind of provide everything for you. I'd avoid getting them to work on their own computers wherever possible, because you just want a little bit more security and control around that.
It's good tip.
Yeah. Great, good to know. Last question, if there is one, before we finish up. Silence. Oh, what have we got? Note taker.
And takeaways from the meeting.
Just ask the note takers to ask questions. They'd probably have some pretty good ones.
Absolutely. Well, I think we can finish up there. That was a lot of information. Yep. Everyone's starting to say thanks. So yes,
hope that was helpful. Everybody,
a lot of information, Tiff. Very, very current. and it helps everyone a lot to sort of understand what what to expect, I guess, when you're doing something, because it all sounds, great in theory. Oh, yeah, let's just offshore someone and not take any responsibility or do you know what I mean? Like let's pick a random person, but it's more about that. It's more than that. It's an extension of your business, and it's another employee.
But there's a lot of benefits, a huge talent pool, great experience. We're talking highly experienced staff with 1, if not 2 degrees, and at about a third of the cost of what you'd pay for people locally. So it really allows you to scale your business quicker. Businesses who offshore increase local opportunities usually by more than 30% because they're able to bring in these support resources far quicker than you would if you were to pay $100,000 or more locally. So there's so many advantages. If you haven't thought about it, you definitely need to. But yeah, you also need to get some of the other areas right.
Yep. And we will send, obviously, with the recording, that QR code for more help, and also that workplace appreciation quiz. I think that would
I'll
be
send it around.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Tiff, and Ray from Access Offshoring, who's on here today. So next Lunch and Learn coming up will be brought to us by Redcat. So looking forward to hearing those guys talk about hospitality IT technology. Thank you so much, everyone, for jumping on. Really appreciate it, and I look forward to seeing you at our next event. We do have the Women in Franchising event in Queensland, or Brisbane, I should say, coming up this Friday. Lisa and I and Jay will be there, as will some of the people that are on this call today, including Tiffany. So, look, and Caitlin's on the call too. She'll be there as well.
Ray.
And Ray. Excellent. See you all soon. Thank you.
Everyone. Have a good day.
Bye, everyone.
See ya.